As Americans mourn the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a battle is brewing in Washington over who should pick her replacement. The 87-year-old equal rights trailblazer died Friday after battling pancreatic cancer. Ginsburg was a feminist icon with a storied law career. In 1972, she founded the Women's Rights Project with the ACLU. She went on to argue 6 gender discrimination cases before an all-male Supreme Court, and she won 5. In 1993, she became the second woman appointed to sit on the country's highest court. She spent her final years often dissenting against a conservative majority. With the election just over a month away, President Trump is promising to fill Ginsburg's seat with a conservative female jurist. That could lock in a right-leaning majority on the court for decades.
We have an obligation. We won, and we have an obligation as the winners to pick who we want. That's not the next president. Hopefully I'll be the next president. But we're here now. Right now we're here.
On Friday, soon after her death was announced, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed to hold a vote soon on whoever the president picks. So far, 2 Republican senators say they do not support voting on a nominee before the election. They are Maine Senator Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes joins me now on the phone from Washington. Nancy, let's talk back in time. 2016, you were there when Mitch McConnell blocked President Barack Obama from appointing Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland to a seat left vacant by the late Justice Antonin Scalia. And that was because it was an election year, and McConnell argued that an open seat shouldn't be filled before a new president was sworn in. I'm going to play for our viewers what he had to say at the time.
The next justice could fundamentally alter the direction of the Supreme Court and have a profound impact on our country. So, of course, the American people should have a say in the court's direction. The Senate will appropriately revisit the matter when it considers the qualifications of the nominee the next president nominates, whoever that might be.
Nancy, how is the precedent that McConnell set 4 years ago now hanging over the Republican Party? And does he have any greater justification for his changed position other than the fact that he's a Republican majority leader and it's now a Republican president that's making the nomination?
Right. So what he has said in the years since that clip that you played is that the situation is different now because back then you had President Obama, a Democrat in the White House, and a Republican-controlled Senate, and now Republicans control both the White House and the Senate, and so that is somehow different. That is not an argument he made forcefully at the time. Back then, all he said was, we're in an election year. That's what a lot of Republicans said, and so we need to wait. That was some 269 days before the election when Merrick Garland was nominated by President Obama. We're now 43 days in advance of an election. And frankly, we're actually already in an election if you consider the fact that voters in many states are already going to the polls in early voting and mailing in their ballots as well. So what you're now hearing from McConnell, from many other Republicans who are on record, like Lindsey Graham, who is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, is that there's no hypocrisy here because what they were arguing at the time, despite their words, is that we were in divided government then and we are not now. And so that justifies their decision to move ahead with this confirmation process.
Well, Nancy, not all Republicans are with him on this. For the nomination to fail, all Democrats and 4 current Republicans would have to break from McConnell. So far, we know that there are 2, Senators Murkowski and Collins. And just today, Biden made an appeal to Republicans to follow the rules that he says they set up back in 2016. How persuasive do you think this might be to folks like Mitt Romney or Chuck Grassley, especially given the position that he took when he was Senate Judiciary Chairman at the time?
I don't think that political persuasion, especially coming from someone like a Democrat, Joe Biden, is really going to have much of an impact. The only thing that I think could have an impact is intense public pressure. You're talking about calls protests from their own constituents. I don't believe, setting Susan Collins aside, she's somewhat a unique case, I don't think that Republicans who are up for election are going to have much incentive to break with the president here, because that would put such a damper on their support from Republican-based voters. It would make it very difficult for them to get across the finish line, even Republicans from swing states like, say, Cory Gardner in Colorado. So Democrats would need 4 Republicans to join them to block this vote. We know of 2, as you pointed out, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. There are other senators that people will be watching. But frankly, I think finding those 2 additional Republicans is going to be very difficult.
Well, there is another variable that could at least complicate the Republican efforts to confirm a nominee that may potentially bring the number from 4 down to 3. That obviously has to do with the Arizona Democratic Senate candidate, Mark Kelly. Nancy, what happens if he wins that seat in November?
So because this is a special election to fill the seat left vacant by the late Senator John McCain, Martha McSally was appointed a couple of years ago. She's now running to win that seat outright. She's in a very tough race, and the polls show the Democrat Mark Kelly leading. Because it's a special election, Arizona law says he can actually be seated earlier than the traditional January 3rd. He could actually be seated in late November as soon as the state certifies the results. So if he wins, yes, that would change the balance of power a little bit in the Senate. You'd go from a 53-47 majority for Republicans to 52-48. So it's likely that if Mitch McConnell is intending to hold a vote, that he would probably want to do it before Mark Kelly was sworn in late November at the earliest. But 2 variables here. First of all, if Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are the only holdouts, then it really doesn't matter if Kelly is sworn in. Republicans would still have the votes. And there's also the possibility that it could take Arizona longer to count its votes than usual. You know, we're seeing around the country that states are struggling to deal with the huge influx in mail-in ballots. It's a little easier in Arizona. About 80% of people do vote by mail in that state, but there's still no guarantee that he will be certified as the winner, if in fact he is the winner, by November 30th, so it could drag on.
Who are President Trump's top picks to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat, and how soon could we see a vote come to the floor on this?
So the 2 individuals who we have heard about the most are both federal appeals court justices. You've got Amy Coney Barrett. She is from the 7th Circuit, based in Chicago. She's 48 years old, mother of 7, deeply conservative, very outspoken about her anti-abortion views. And then there's Barbara Lagoa. She's a judge in the 11th Circuit, which is based in Atlanta. She is 52, mother of 3, a first-generation Cuban immigrant, originally from Florida. And so there are pluses and minuses to both if President Trump wants to move quickly. Amy Coney Barrett is someone who has been on the Senate's radar before. He was considering her the last time around, so that could help him move someone through the Senate process more quickly. On the other hand, Barbara Lagoa, because of her Florida ties, is someone who he might see as helping him in Florida in the upcoming election, so he might choose to go that route. Once he does nominate his pick, and it could happen as early as this week, then senators set up interviews, one-on-one conversations with the individual, who then begins to prepare for a confirmation hearing. And then it just all depends on when the Judiciary Committee decides to schedule that confirmation hearing. It can go pretty quickly. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was confirmed within a matter of weeks. I think it was 44 days. So it can happen pretty quickly. Sometimes it stretches on.
44 days, which is just about the same amount of time that we have between now and the election. Nancy, is there anything that Senate Democrats could do to stop Republicans or even slow down the process?
Well, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, said today that she does have, arrows in her quiver. She's not going to reveal right now. The reality is that there isn't much procedurally that they can do to slow things down. Some Democrats have suggested perhaps holding up government funding. Pelosi said flat out today that she's not going to do that the government needs to be funded. And so beyond that, the only thing that they can do is really marshal public support to their side. And you saw that last night when Elizabeth Warren was at a rally. She's the Massachusetts Democrat, of course, arguing that there is so much at stake going forward: Roe versus Wade, the Affordable Care Act, the right to vote, that people need to realize that this is a moment of reckoning, and they need to stand up and say, I will fight. You also saw Democrats making some $90 million worth of donations to Act Blue, the Democratic fundraising organization, just since Ginsburg's death was announced on Friday night. So there is an appetite to fight. And the thinking that perhaps if there is a huge public uproar, that'll put pressure on some of these wavering Republicans, if there are any. But beyond that, there is not much that the Democrats can do procedurally in the Senate to slow this down.
Well, Nancy, you mentioned the Senate confirmation of Ginsburg in 1993. She was confirmed overwhelmingly by a vote of 96 to just 3 holdouts. It used to be the case that nominees who were qualified were supported independent of ideology. Having watched Congress, do you think that those days are just behind us now?
I think those days are completely behind us, and this process has been utterly transformed. The Kavanaugh fight was so bitter, so divisive. I've never seen anything like it on Capitol Hill. People were so angry over how it played out on both sides that I just don't think you'll see that kind of coming together anymore. It used to be that, yes, these confirmation battles were fierce and all-consuming, and of course the other side was disappointed when someone else, when someone from a different political point of view was nominated. At the end of the day, however, even if they didn't agree with them on policy, if they felt that the person was qualified for the job, they went ahead and voted for them in a show of unity to sort of give them the legitimacy that they deserved as a new justice of the Supreme Court. That is not going to happen this time. It did not happen with Kavanaugh. He got 1 Democratic vote, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. It is just not going to happen here. Feelings are so raw. Senators are so bitter about how this is playing out. And, there's a very real possibility, Lana, that all of this could play out in the weeks following the presidential election when we don't even know who has won the presidency, because it is going to take so long to count the ballots this time around. We may not know who has won the White House. We may not know which party has won control of the Senate, even as a confirmation vote for the next Supreme Court justice is taking place. I can't think of a scenario that is going to engender more anger and more bitterness on both sides than that.
Yeah, let alone if then challenges are made to those election results that end up before a Supreme Court. All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you.
You're welcome.